The barn door creaked like it hadn't been opened since last thaw. A veil of dust drifted in the sharp winter light as Bose McKinnon stepped through, the cold hitching its breath against the warmth still trapped in the timber. He was early, always was. The sun hadn't cracked the horizon yet, but he'd already saddled his gelling rode 2 mi into town, and now stood in the narrow corridor of Harlon Price's horse barn with the silent patience of a man who didn't rush for much except maybe grief that he'd never outrun. He tugged his gloves tighter as he stepped past a row of iron stalls, half watching a dapple gray mare watching him back. Straw clung to his boots. He moved like someone accustomed to silence, a man who didn't expect conversation and didn't offer it either. He was here to buy a workhorse, nothing more, but something wasn't right. From the back stall second to the left came a sound that didn't belong, not the stomp of hooves or clink of bit. There was breath. A human kind of breath, ragged. What? Not made for the cold. He froze, moved slow, didn't call out, just stepped around the edge, boots careful not to crunch. There, slumped against the rear wall behind a curtain of old hay bales, was a woman. Her wrists were bound in front of her with twine cut from horse rope. Face mottled with fading bruises, lips split, eyes swollen, but sharp with defiance that hadn't yet been beaten out. A faded cotton dress torn at one shoulder. Her boots were missing, her ankles were scabbed, but her back was straight. She didn't beg, she didn't cry. She looked at him, and that was all. Looked like someone who'd been looked at too long by the wrong kind of men, and didn't trust the quiet kind either. Bose didn't speak. He just breathed once deep through his nose, then crouched. She flinched when he reached toward her wrists. From behind them came the scrape of spurs. "Well, hell," said a voice too smooth for dirt country. "You got an early McKinnon, Harland Price. Trim coat, shiny boots, silver hair as licked back like he'd been born smug. He didn't look at the woman, just stepped past like she was a misplaced saddle. Horse is a fine beast," Price said, motioning to the next stall over. "You'll like him, strong shoulders, steady gait, but I'll sweeten the deal." Bose didn't rise. He was still crouched beside the woman, untying the knots with fingers that didn't shake. Price clicked his tongue. "She's part of the sale. Call it a bonus. No answer. She's a runaway. Claimed she was somebody's niece. Turns out she ain't no one's anything. Found her sneaking through my stables 2 weeks back. I've been feeding her, keeping her out of trouble. You know how it is. Lonely thing like that. Someone's got to make choices for her." The rope fell away. Boas stood. "She yours?" he asked, voice low flat. Price laughed. "Come on now, don't be difficult." "You want the horse or not?" Bose turned, faced him full on for the first time. "She yours?" There was a silence that pulled at the walls. "She's in my care." Bose didn't blink, didn't speak again. He just stepped back, offered his hand to the woman. She didn't take it, but she did stand slow and stiff, wincing as circulation came back to her legs. She walked out of that stall beside him barefoot on straw without speaking a word. Just her and him in that too-silent barn. They didn't take the horse, they took the cold. Outside, the wind had picked up, cut like truth. As they walked to Bose's wagon, folks at the edge of town were already starting to stir. First eyes peeked through curtains. Then the gossip came like thaw melt, slow at first, then rushing. A man like Bose didn't bring home strange women. A woman like that didn't belong anywhere decent. She sat curled under a wool blanket in the back of his wagon. And he didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. Just stared ahead like she'd seen too much of what came before and didn't dare guess what came next. At the cabin, Bose opened the door, lit the lantern, let her enter first. The hearth was cold, but he laid kindling without words and struck the flint. The fire caught slow, then steady. She stayed standing, eyes scanning every inch, looking for exits. He noticed, said nothing. She still hadn't spoken. He set bread on the table, warmed coffee, sat across from her, and waited, not for a story, for her to finish eating. That was all. The woman ate like a starved animal, but her gaze stayed proud. She chewed each bite as though she still had dignity tucked somewhere between her ribs. He slid a folded blanket her way. She hesitated before touching it, then tucked it beneath her elbow, still seated. She wouldn't lie down, not yet, not here. Later that night, when Bose walked outside to check the latch on the barn, he paused, looked out toward the pines thick with frost, his breath clouded in the air like smoke. There were no horses tied outside, no payment exchanged, no promises made, just a woman behind a stall and a man who didn't believe in leaving people where they weren't meant to be. Inside, the fire cracked. She watched it like it held a language she couldn't speak anymore, but she was listening, maybe for the first time in a long while, and Boaz, he sat by the window, watching snowfall settle over a fence that had once marked the edge of his sorrow. It no longer felt like a border. It felt like the beginning of something slow, quiet, and unfinished, something worth staying up to see. And reader, if you've ever found something good where you weren't supposed to be looking, you know already sometimes a man goes to buy a horse, and instead brings home the part of himself he thought was gone forever. The first morning she didn't speak. Bose found her outside at dawn, curled on the porch bench, blanket wrapped tight around her knees, as if she'd never quite stopped waiting for someone to come tear her from it. Her bare feet hovered above the boards, not touching the ground, as though she didn't trust the world enough to land on it just yet. He didn't ask what she was doing out there. He simply handed her a cup of coffee, steam curling into the pale morning, and stood beside her, eyes scanning the hills for something that hadn't yet come. She took the mug with both hands, didn't drink, didn't thank him either, and Bose didn't expect her to. Inside, the fire hadn't died through the night. He'd kept feeding it long after she'd fallen asleep on the floor, cocooned in the same wool blanket he'd once buried his dog in. She hadn't taken the bed, hadn't even glanced toward the room, just sat down in the corner like she belonged nowhere. That morning he set out for the north pasture. Fence boards had come loose again, stubborn against the wind. He left her bread, eggs, a basin of clean water. When he returned midday, the food was gone. The basin emptied, but the woman wasn't in the house. He found her in the barn, not hiding, just sitting in the hay beside the stall she'd once been bound in, staring at the dust mows, dancing through a beam of light. Boaz stood at the doorway for a moment, watching her. She didn't look up. She was wearing one of his flannel shirts, swallowed her shoulders whole. Her own torn dress hung from a peg, rinsed and dripping. He didn't ask why she'd washed it. He knew she meant to leave, but she hadn't yet. Later that afternoon, she lit the stove without asking, fumbled through his shelves, cracked 2 eggs into a pan. Her hands were bruised but steady. She didn't speak even as the scent of frying yolk filled the kitchen. She placed the plate in front of him. He nodded once. She sat across the room by the window, arms folded as though putting the table between them would shield her from kindness she couldn't return. He took a bite, sipped water. Delaney, the words slipped like an apology. She looked up. His gaze didn't press her. "That your name?" he asked. A long silence. Then barely more than a breath, she said. Yes, the sound of it cracked something in the room, not the walls, something quieter, something closer to the heart. She didn't say more, just watched the last of the light drain from the edge of the hills, the snow catching fire as it went. That evening, Adam McCraw arrived. She knocked with the back of her knuckles and didn't wait to be invited in. A tall woman with silver street hair wrapped in a sage-green shawl that had seen more winters than most of the town combined. She brought thread and sugar, though Bose hadn't asked for either. Her eyes flicked to Delaney, still by the fire, still small as if bracing for ridicule, and didn't soften, but didn't harden either. "Well," Eda said, setting her basket down. "The wind's turned mean." Bose nodded. "It's going to freeze by morning." Eda shifted her gaze. "She's staying long." Bose didn't answer. Delaney answered for him. "Just till I figure we're next." Eda raised an eyebrow. Plenty of folk in town figuring the same. Delaney's jaw twitched. "I'm not folk, no." Eda agreed, "but they'll talk like you are." That was the truth of it. The next morning, Bose rode into town for salt and oats. He didn't linger, didn't need to, but word had already bloomed like frost across windows. The man who never spoke much had taken in a strange girl, barefoot, bruised, no family. Whispers bent beneath doorways. Deputy Biasbuai asked casual-like if Bose needed help at the ranch. When Boaz said no, the deputy leaned on the counter and said, just making sure she's there on her own will. She's Bose said 'cause Heron came in riled claims she owes him for boarding. Says she ran with his money. Bose didn't look at the man, just picked up the sack of oats and walked out. When he returned home, Delaney wasn't in the house, wasn't in the barn. He found her behind the shed, hands in the cold dirt, planting something in rows too straight to be aimless. What are you doing? He asked. She didn't glance up. There were seeds in the pantry, but I thought, maybe come spring. Her voice caught. She kept her eyes on the earth. I don't know where I'll become spring. She added. He crouched beside her. Not too close. You can stay. She shook her head. I ain't yours to keep. I didn't say that. The soil clung to her fingers like guilt. People will say things. They already are. She looked at him, eyes tired. Why are you being kind? He didn't answer. Not then. Instead, he stood, brushed the dirt from his palms, and went inside. When he returned, he handed her a pair of boots, worn laces, frayed but solid. They weren't his wife's, they were his. He'd walked the property line in them for 6 years. He set them down without comment. Delaney touched them like she didn't deserve to, then slipped them on. A week passed. She began sleeping in the bed. He never asked her to. She never thanked him. One night by the fire, she picked up his wife's sewing basket. He flinched, not outwardly, not loud, but she noticed. Her hand froze mid-stitch. I can put it back. He stared at the thread trembling between her fingers. No, he said, she'd like it being used. That night, as the wind howled and the fire flickered like memory, Delaney sang. It was barely more than a hum, an old tune the kind mothers pass down when babies cry through storm nights, but it filled the cabin like breath. Bose didn't interrupt, didn't even look at her, but when she finished, he said, My wife used to sing that when the pipes froze. Delaney didn't reply. She just hummed it once more, softer, like a prayer. A few days later, Harlon Price came, rode up the drive with boots too polished for mud and a grin that didn't belong near fences. Delaney froze at the window, backed away as if his smile had teeth. Boaz stepped outside before she could speak. You come for the horse? He asked. Heron dismounted, brushing invisible dust from his coat. I come for what's mine. Bose didn't move. Got papers, Harlon said, pulling them from inside his coat. Signed by her kin. Her stepbrother gave me rights of labor exchange. She's property till her debt's worked off. Boaz took the papers, read them slow, folded them smaller, put them in his coat. She ain't property. She ran. Harlan said, that's breach of contract. I could have the law on this, then do for the first time. Harlan's grin cracked. She ain't worth the trouble. You'll see. She'll run again. That's what girls like her do. Boaz turned toward the cabin. Then I'll run too. Heron left. But Delaney didn't sleep that night. Neither did Boaz. He sat by the hearth. She sat by the door. When the sun finally broke the edge of the hills, she stood, said a note on the table, walked out in his old boots, coat cinched tight, head high. The note read, Thank you for never asking me to smile. By the time he read it, she was already halfway to town. But she didn't walk like someone escaping. She walked like someone deciding where her story would go next. And that was something he understood because he'd once walked away from his own life too, not to escape, but to remember what it meant to stay. And now it was her turn. Snow turned to sleep that week. Sharp, stinging drops that pelted roofs like gravel and turned every path into a glaze of misery. Delaney didn't come back the first day or the second, but Bose checked the road to town each morning quietly, not watching, just noting. He kept her coat hanging by the door, not because he expected her to return, because he wasn't ready to believe she wouldn't. Then 3 nights after the note, he heard a knock, not timid, not panicked, just there. She stood on the porch, soaked to the bone, hair stuck to her cheeks, fingers blue with cold. Her eyes didn't search his face for welcome, only for space. A question hung between them, unspoken, heavy. Would he let her in again? You stepped aside. She walked past him without a word, dripping on the floorboards. You brought her a towel. She didn't thank him, just dried her hair in rough motions. Her breath sharp and short. What happened? He asked, voice low. Delaney peeled off the damp coat. I asked Etta for work. Bose nodded once. She turned you down. No, she gave me a needle and 2 shirts to mend. She dropped into the chair by the hearth. Didn't ask questions. Just watched me for a long time like she already knew every one of my answers. Silence stretched. Bose poured her a cup of tea and set it beside her. She didn't reach for it, just stared into the fire. She said, "There's a price to being seen." Bose leaned against the wall. "And you, I ain't figured if I can afford it." Outside, wind rattled the windows. She added more quietly, "Christ found me." Bose's jaw tensed. He tried to grab my arm on the street. Said I made him look like a fool. Said, if I wanted to eat without him, I better find papers to prove I ever existed. Did he hurt you? No, a beat passed, not this time. Bose took the kettle off the stove and poured a second cup, set it in front of her again. She still didn't drink. You watched her a while, longer before he said, "You're safe here." She shook her head slowly. "No one's safe, Boaz. They're just tolerated or gone." The fire popped. Embers cracked like knuckles. She stared at it as if waiting for it to admit something. That night, she didn't sleep in the bed. She took the floor again, not out of fear, maybe habit, maybe because it didn't feel right taking comfort when it hadn't been earned. Bose left her be. The next morning, she was outside splitting wood, coat hanging open, shirt sleeves pushed up to elbows. Her swing was sloppy, but her determination was near violent. He approached slow. She didn't stop. "You're going to wreck your wrist," he said. "I ain't breaking, just burn in." He reached for the axe. She jerked it away. "Delaney." She stared him down, jaw clenched, eyes glassy. Then suddenly she dropped the axe, let it fall into the snow with a dull thud. Her shoulders curled inward like the weight of her own rage had finally folded her. "You picked up the axe, didn't swing, just held it. You ever had something done to you so long," she whispered, "that even when it stops, you still wake up choking on it?" Bose didn't speak. "I don't want to be scared anymore," she said. He nodded once, then stopped swinging like someone else's ghost is in your arms. She laughed sharp, breathless. "You think I can let go of it that easy?" "No," he said. "I think you've already started." That night she cooked cornbread and stew. She didn't ask permission, just did it. Moved around the kitchen like she was carving out a place for herself, one spoonful at a time. Boaz sat at the table watching. After supper, she reached for the sewing basket, pulled out a sleeve she'd begun stitching earlier, and resumed. Thread slid smooth between fingers, steadier than before. Boaz asked, "You ever think of leaving for good?" Delaine's eyes didn't lift from the fabric. "I did every day till you untied my hands," and now she paused. "I'm thinking a beat," he nodded. "That's more than most folks ever do." The next day she returned to Etta's shop, this time with her shoulders squared and her hair pinned back. She wore the flannel shirt tucked into a skirt now hemmed to fit. It didn't matter that it was stitched with scraps. It fit her like a quiet flag, one that didn't beg to be noticed, but refused to disappear. People stared, but she didn't look away. Etta gave her a table in the back and a stack of mending. Said nothing more than, "Your hands alert." They did. A week passed. Price kept his distance, but word traveled. Folks said Bose was living with a woman who didn't belong, that she was someone's kept debt, that she was lucky he hadn't sent her back. Bose ignored them until Deputy Bixby showed up again, rode in slow, hat tipped low, voice quieter than usual. "Bo," he said, "there's talk now. There's always talk. This kind's louder. They're saying you stole property." Boaz stared at him. "She's not property. Doesn't matter what she is to you." Harlan's pulling the law in. Bose folded his arms, then let him come himself. "He will court papers, too. You need proof she was mistreated. She was tied up in a stall." "Did you see it?" Bose's silence was answer enough. The deputy sighed. "It ain't about truth, Bo. It's about who folks believe." When Bixby left, Delaney was already waiting on the porch. She'd heard enough to know the rhythm of injustice by now. "I'll go," she said. "I won't drag you through a mess. You didn't drag me. I don't want to be the reason your neighbors spit when they see you. They already do. Just used to be over other things." Delaney looked down at her hands. "It's never going to end, is it?" Bose was quiet then. "You want it too." Her eyes rose slowly. He held out the folded papers Harlon had brought, the ones signed by her stepbrother. They'd been crumpled, dirt-smudged, but still legible. "I didn't burn these," he said, "because I knew one day you'd want to." She stared at the parchment, reached for it. Her fingers shook, then steadied. She walked to the fire, held the edge over the flame. It caught slow, crawled inward like it wasn't sure it was allowed to destroy something so long feared. When it blackened to ash and drifted upward, she watched every curl. Bose watched her. When she turned, her face wasn't smiling, but it was freer, not healed, but no longer pretending to be broken. That night she sang again, not a lullaby. This time a tune with words rough, edged half-remembered lyrics about rivers and women who made it across without help. Her voice cracked in places, but she didn't stop. Boaz sat in the doorway, one leg up on the porch rail, listening. He didn't say a word when she finished. He just tipped his head, and for the first time said her name like it meant something more than a wound. "Delaney," she turned. "I don't need you to stay," he said, "but I'd like to build you a room if you do." She blinked, not from surprise, but from something deeper, recognition. Then, with a voice as soft as snowfall, "Boss, I never asked to be rescued. I know, but I wouldn't mind being remembered." He nodded, then went to fetch his hammer, and that was how the fire started to catch, not all at once. Not with sparks and sparks alone, but with two people building walls that finally felt like they were meant to hold warmth, not secrets. And if you've ever met someone who didn't try to fix you, just held a door open till you were ready to walk through, then you know sometimes the fire you couldn't light for years just needed someone to hand you the match. The sky hung low over town that morning, swollen with snow that hadn't yet fallen. Light filtered thin through the clouds, casting everything in a hush, the kind of hush that comes before judgment, or maybe revelation. Delaney walked down Main Street in Bose's wife's old red coat, the hem brushing her boots, her shoulders straight, her eyes forward. People stared, not because she looked wild, she didn't anymore, not because she was bruised. The marks were gone. They stared because she didn't lower her gaze, because she had the audacity to walk like she belonged. The coat didn't fit quite right. It clung to her frame like it remembered a different body. But it was warm, and it was hers now, not by gift, but by survival. She passed the mercantile, the post, the church bell that hadn't rung in weeks. Eyes followed from windows, behind curtains, through gaps and porch railings. Whispers chased her like leaves and wind. "She's the one that ran from Price. I heard she's got the rancher wrapped around her fingers. She was nothing when she got here. She still is." Delaney didn't flinch. Her face held no defiance, just dignity, heavy and deliberate. She turned into Adam McCraw's shop. The bell above the door jangled like a warning. Etta looked up from the counter and said nothing at first, just glanced at the clock, then nodded to the pile of mending waiting in the back. "You're early," she said, had something to prove. Delaney replied, shrugging off the coat and folding it neatly on a chair. Ida watched her long and quiet. "You'll have to prove it again tomorrow." "I plan to." The room was still. Needles lay scattered across a pincushion like tiny bayonets. Outside, the murmurs grew louder. It happened sometime around noon. Harlon Price walked into town, not in a rush, not in a rage, just calm and slick and righteous, like he thought the town owed him silence. He spotted her through the shop window, marched in without knocking, without asking. The bell above the door screamed as he pushed through. "There you are," he said. Delaney froze, fingers mid-thread. Etta set her scissors down slowly. "You think you can humiliate me?" Harlon snarled. "You think you can just show your face like you didn't steal from me? You're still mine, girl." Delaney rose, not fast, not shaking. "I'm not yours," she said. Harlon reached for her, a grab, not a touch. That's when the door opened again. Bosp. He stood there in his canvas coat, hat still dusted with snow, boots wet from the creek crossing. His hands were empty, but his presence was heavy. He didn't shout, didn't draw. He just stepped between them. "She told you no." Boaz said she's a liar. "She's free." Harlon scoffed. "She's a stray. You're keeping her like a dog and calling it charity." Boaz stared at him. No expression. Just that endless, unreadable quiet he carried like armor. "Then why you so scared of her walking through town?" People had gathered outside now. not pretending anymore. Just standing there watching through the windows, pretending it wasn't their business. While leaning in with breath held, "I have signed paper," Harlan said, pulling a crumpled sheet from his coat. "Legal claim. Eda stepped out from behind the counter, and I saw you drag her into that stall 2 months ago. She had no shoes. You shut the door and bolted it from the outside. That's slander. Then sue me." Another voice joined, "Mrs. Norling from the bakery. I saw you pass an envelope to that deputy, few dollars more than a horse's worth." "Y'all are making a mistake." Bose's voice was quiet. "Dangerous. You already did." The bell jingled again. Deputy Brixby. He stepped in with a ledger under one arm and sweat already beating at his temples. He didn't look at Bose, didn't look at Harlan, just said, "I got new orders." County judge reviewed the affidavit. He cleared his throat. "Harlan Price, you're to come with me." Harlan's mouth opened, then shut. He looked around and realized maybe for the first time that no one was stepping forward for him. Not the grocer, not the pastor, not even the law. Delaney didn't smile, didn't speak. She just stepped back, watched him leave, watched everything she'd feared shrink down into the size of a man who couldn't stand sunlight. Bose turned to her, held her gaze, didn't touch her, didn't need to. Outside, the town was still again, but not with fear. With quiet reckoning, Eda returned to her counter. Mrs. Norling to her bread. Life resumed, but something had shifted. Delaney picked up her red coat, folded it over her arm. She walked outside, not hiding. Boaz followed, a step behind, not as her guard, as her equal. They reached the wagon. Snow began to fall soft as sifted flour. She paused at the rail, looked at the horizon where the gray of sky met the white of field, then turned to him. "Why did you follow me that day?" she asked. He took a long breath. "Because some things don't need a reason, just a right moment." She nodded. They didn't ride home right away. They stood there in the stillness, letting the cold bite and the silence settle. And if you've ever watched someone walk through fire and come out carrying nothing but their name, then you already know what Bose knew. You don't save a woman like that. You just walk beside her long enough until she starts believing she was never lost. The sky broke open the day Delaney chose to stay. Snow had been falling since dawn, thick and silent, blanketing every fence post, every roof shingle, every split board in the barn that had once held her like a coffin. By midday the land looked reborn, clean, hushed, and holy in the way only winter can manage. She stood by the fence, breath clouding around her like steam, watching the hills blur into white. Bose was chopping wood nearby, sleeves rolled past his elbows, sweat darkening his collar even in the cold. Neither of them spoke. Words had begun to feel like bridges that didn't always need crossing. She didn't tell him she wasn't leaving. He didn't ask, but he saw the way she'd unpacked the small tin comb from her satchel and left it by the wash basin. Saw her boots drying by the fire, not near the door, but tucked in beside his. Saw her hand-stitching new curtains from old linen. No pattern, just instinct, quiet declarations, gentle claims. That evening, she found him in the barn, hammering a new beam into the frame of what used to be a broken stall. "You fixing it for a new horse?" she asked. He paused, turned slowly, eyes soft but unreadable. "No." She stepped closer. The barn smelled of old wood and snow melt. She ran her hand along the edge of the beam. It was smooth, clean. He watched her fingers trace the grain. Thought maybe it should be something else now, like what, a pantry or a root cellar, maybe a cradle, depends what the house needs next. She didn't laugh, but something in her face softened like a thaw just beneath the skin. Her fingers stopped, rested flat against the beam. "I don't want to be someone you rescued," she said. "You're not. I don't want pity or charity. You set the hammer down. You ever seen me hand out either?" Delaney looked at him then, not the way a woman sizes a man up. Not the way she once looked at danger, but the way someone looks when they've stopped running and want to know what happens next. "I didn't come here to be yours," she whispered. "But I don't want to leave and forget you either." Bose moved a step closer, enough for the cold to warm between them. "I don't want you to be mine," he said. "I want you to be here if that's what you want." Her breath hitched. "Can you build something with someone?" she asked. Even when both of you are still broken in places, only then he said that's the only way it holds. That night they didn't talk much. She made supper beans and cornbread and something sweet with dried apples, and he stoked the fire until it danced like it had waited years to be noticed. They sat at the table eating in companionable silence, the kind of silence that fills rather than empties. Later, she took down his wife's old wedding shawl from the hook by the window, folded it gently, pressed it into a drawer, not to erase the woman who came before, but to make space for the woman who came after. He noticed, said nothing, but when he stepped onto the porch, he left the door open behind him. A small thing, but she felt it like an invitation. Snow had stopped falling. Moonlight glazed the fields in silver. She stepped outside and stood beside him. They looked out across the land, not at what had been taken from them, but what might still be built. "Bose," she said after a long silence, if I really stayed, what would you want from me?" He didn't answer right away. He just watched the wind swirl through the trees, then finally looked at her, steady and sure. "A name on the deed, a cup on the shelf, a hand I can reach for when the night gets long. Nothing more." She exhaled, sharp and trembling. "That's everything," he nodded once. Later, in the cabin's warmth, she brushed her hair beside the fire, the way she used to when no one was looking. Only this time someone was. Bose sat in the chair across from her, his hands resting on his knees, just watching, not to claim, not to judge, just to witness the sacred act of seeing without demanding. She smiled then, a real one, small, crooked. And that's when he reached beneath the table and slid a folded paper toward her. A deed, half the land, half the house, signed with his name. She stared at it like it might vanish if she blinked. "I didn't do anything to deserve this," she said. "No one ever does," he replied. "That's why it means something." The wind howled outside, but inside it was quiet. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled as she folded the paper and placed it beside her plate, and he didn't ask if she'd stay because she already had. That night she slept in the bed, and he slept on the floor just once more because some transitions need to happen with grace. But in the morning when she woke, he was beside her, fully clothed, boots still on but there. And she didn't pull away. They lay in silence, eyes open, facing the wood ceiling. When she spoke, her voice was barely louder than the wind. "You ever think some people were never meant to be saved, but maybe just held until they could stand up on their own?" He turned his head, met her gaze. "That's the only kind I've ever trusted." The fire still crackled. Outside, fresh snow glistened untouched, but inside, something had finally landed. And reader, if you've ever mistaken a roof for a home or a house for safety, then you know by now what you call a home ain't always a place with walls. Sometimes it's the silence that lets you heal. Sometimes it's the man who doesn't ask questions, just builds you a door you can close from the inside. And sometimes it's the red coat hanging by that door, a little worn, a little faded, proof you walked through something no one else did and came out whole. So if you ever find someone who sees you not for what you were, but for what you're still becoming, stay, because you found the kind of home that can't burn down.